Shannon Clark is a senior vice president over at Palantir. I gave you a couple of her interviews before. She's an absolute stud. She's an absolute superstar of Palantir, working there for over a decade, 10 years. She started at Palantir when she was just 23 years old, and she has connections at the highest points of government. I actually have no idea how she's working for Palantir at such a young age, but she absolutely knocks it out of the park. She just did a panel at the Reagan Institute. On the panel was her, somebody asking questions, a moderator. People were asking questions from the crowd, from the audience. A representative for Anduril was there. He actually worked at Palantir before and one other company. This is around a 45-minute interview. I condensed everything to around 19 minutes. I took all the parts out and I only showed you what she was saying. She absolutely shined in this interview. Literally, she did like 80% of the talking, even though there were 4 people on stage. She absolutely hit a home run. In this specific panel, they're going to be talking about AI integration, working with the military, what problems there is working with the military, the future of working with the military, the crosses between working with the military and then working in the commercial sector, and how it was back in the day compared to how it is right now. And she also speaks about a connection between what Dr. Alex Karp always talks about, we're competing with PowerPoints. And she says, hey, back in the day when we used to go in to do these meetings, nobody knew who Palantir was. And we had a product that actually worked right now in action on the spot. And we thought for sure we were going to get a contract. But we were competing against other companies that are saying, hey, we have a possibility of what can happen in the future. And this is what Dr. Alex Karp means by we're competing against PowerPoints. They're presenting these, fairy tales to government, to companies, so on and so forth. It's the same thing of, hey, we have a company that could work. Meanwhile, Palantir is saying, we don't have a company that could work. We have a Palantir that 100% will work. And at times they have to get aggressive, sue the army twice, sue whoever they need to, not to use their products, but to actually open up their eyes and think about a better opportunity. And in many times the government wastes tons and tons of money thinking that they could build something better, but alas, they cannot. And they end up taking all that money, throw it out, and end up using companies like Palantir and others at the end. This is an absolutely fabulous, fabulous interview. I try to condense it. I try to take out all the bad parts. You guys are absolutely going to enjoy it. And if you really do enjoy these type of videos, I do have channel membership down below. It's $3 a month. It really helps me out to make these awesome videos for you. Between all my channels, I make like 10 videos a day, and it really does help me. I'm going to play the interview right now, but before I do, I wanted to give you one message before the weekend. I need you to make sure you keep it clean in between because hygiene is very important. Enjoy the rest of this video.
And I am our Senior Vice President for R&D. I've been at Palantir for about 11 years now. We are a data integration company at its core, but we like to say that we're working with some of the world's largest organizations and governments working on their hardest data challenges and really making sense of that data. So I spend the majority of my time focused on our defense work. I started at the company working a lot of our SOCOM work. And that's expanded into a lot more of our AI work and just anywhere where we're forward deployed in the United States and we can help our warfighters.
So is part of your job interpreting demand signal?
Absolutely. And we love to do that in the field and not necessarily sitting here in DC with the professionals that are helping putting those requirements together. But I think one of the special things that we've been able to do really over the last almost 2 decades is forward deploy, is be with users, is really do that, test, fix, test again in the field to learn approach. And we only are able to do that when we get to sit down with users and kind of understand their hardest problems. That's where we like to see the demand come from.
Yeah. From the builder side or the seller side, when we're kind of talking about these friction points and just the ease at which tech companies deal with things like the DoD and the intelligence community, what can you tell me about what you've seen on that demand side over the last year or two that you think are promising signs, things that have erased friction points instead of put them up?
And I do think it's getting better. And harking back to like, if we look at 10 years ago, when that was at Palantir, and we would go, as Palantir is the scrappy startup, and we would walk into a room and we would respond to a solicitation, and we were so excited. We had this great demo. We were going to show how our product worked, and we would be up against folks that would have, large primes that would have 100-page, PowerPoint presentation, and they would show what they could build in 5 years. And we thought naively, well, we have this thing that will work today, and we would lose time after time out, because I think that they trusted that those large companies knew what they were doing. And even though maybe what they had wasn't available today, that they would have that in 5 years, because they do have these large R&D budgets. And it was really frustrating and disappointing for us. But I think what we've shown, and I even remember this like very critical demo we did, I think it was actually with CBP, who said, we're going to give you some data and we're going to ask you to come back in a few days and show us what you can do with that data. And it was like they weren't going to accept a PowerPoint presentation for that. And we came back and we showed, and that was what won the day, because they actually saw that this is a real thing that users can have, that we can field in a month and not in 5 years. And we are seeing more acquisition processes go that way. I think when you look at some of the large Army acquisition projects right now, some of the ones that we're involved in, Titan is a good example. It's do demos, down select to a few vendors, send those vendors out in the field, have them work with the users, as I mentioned before, and really refine those requirements in a way that's not done in a room with an acquisitions officer just checking the box to say. And I don't say that in disservice to the acquisition officer. I say that because it's so important for us to see what breaks in the field and not what breaks in the lab, or what breaks according to a PowerPoint presentation. So my hope is that we continue to move in that direction more, especially when we're looking at software acquisitions. But I also think this is why it's really interesting now to see the government move towards allowing some software companies to be primes. And I think there's a good example of this in our partnership with some of those folks on the stage as we work on that with some of the on Titan in particular with the Army. I don't think that was something that anyone would have 10 years ago would have said, oh, we will let a software company do this. But it's really interesting now, because there's components of Titan that are hardware that we're never. I don't think some of the people on my team would love to say they're going to go build a satellite or go build a truck, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. So at least not that I've heard. But I think I think there is a leap of faith there. I think it's going really well so far. So I'm hoping that it's kind of a lesson to be learned to allow this in the future, or have the proclivity to do this more in the future.
Your three companies are pretty well capitalized companies, so I'm not sure if you're the greatest example of this, but that's one of the first things that people told me about when I kind of opened up this subject, is this picture of there's a lot of little technology companies out there that might have great products, great technology. Maybe some of them are trying to be dual use companies, but is it still a real possibility that if they're trying to rely on government contracts that they just won't make it across?
Yeah, I think, what did Alex Moore say? Was it like $1 billion or something like that? A few minutes ago, and obviously he's very familiar at 8VC with how much capital is needed. And I think a lot of times when you hear Peter Thiel or others talk about successful companies, and he names Palantir and SpaceX, and you look at the people that are behind those companies, you can come to the same conclusion you just made. I think what we see is that we at Palantir want to pay it forward to those companies. I think a lot of what we're doing right now is partnering with some of these small AI companies to bring them into the fold and to help them give them some more stability about what it looks like a year or two from now as being part of a program of record that we're on, because we know what it was like to go to the board and have to tell them, like, well, we got this small pilot. It's only $1 million. We hope that it turns into something. But like back in the room, we're like, crap, we had a lot of work to do to make this, into something successful, or to make this part of a program of record. So I actually think it's almost like a corporate responsibility of ours to help some of these companies. And like I said, give them some more stability as they're going through this process, because it's hard for them. I mean, I don't envy them having to go to their boards and explain, well, we won this SBIR. Okay, what does this mean for you next year? They may not know the answer to that. So that's one thing that we're doing to try and kind of be, I think, a good partner to other, small companies that are going through that process right now.
I think somebody told me about this idea of being able to get to a no quickly for companies that aren't ready, just like end their pain, and get onto the companies that can actually do it, and then put money behind those companies.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, you probably be saving them a lot of time and frustration, of being kind of more frontal and more honest with that. And I could see that. I mean, there are a lot of companies. I remember someone telling me once when I was in Tampa, like once a system gets put on the system, it never really gets taken off. It might like kind of die a slow death and it's there, but it never gets taken off. And I didn't really believe them. And then I saw that unfold over the next 10 years where I was like, but no one's using that. Yeah, but we still have the licenses because maybe there's one or two people in the back room. But I think that's very true. But like I said, I mean, I do think it's getting better. I feel like I'm hearing less of that frustration recently. So I want to say that that's a good sign. I don't know actually what is making that determination or why it's getting better, but I like that I hear less of it because I feel like there was a period 2 years ago, almost pre-COVID, where it's like every company I talked to, they were like, well, we just won this SIBR, and I didn't really know what to make of that, and I don't think they did either. So hopefully we're seeing some changes that are helping those companies.
One thing that I heard when I was originally researching this is that if you want to get into this kind of business, you have to design a wonderful product that makes sense, but you also have to design an approach to doing sort of the process within the buyer. One great tactic is having a champion within the buyer who's going to carry the torch for you. Are there other things that you've learned just about working with the federal government that kind of have smoothed your way to, getting a timely decision at least on your product?
I think you're right. Having a champion is absolutely important. I don't think any of us have created a solution that I would say was easily understandable or interpretable at first shot, meeting with someone, because the three of us have all been part of companies that have built something novel. And so, our approach to everything from what we built to the approach that we took. So I actually don't think that any of us built anything that was consumable or building towards the buyer either. In fact, it took a lot of sweat and tears and work to actually convince someone why what we were building made sense and why it was better.
I see.
So with each friction point, I think, or with the success stories, definitely has come a lot of friction. I think about working on, something a few years ago where we had, the most senior person, in the branch saying like, I need this, but it still took 2 years to be able to get a solicitation and be able to, and to go through the competitive process and win that. And if it's like a 4-star general is saying, I need this today for, the readiness and the health of my people, but it still takes 2 years to go through that. There's success in that it finally happened, but it doesn't, the timeline for that is really long. Right. So I think, like I said, with each success, there's a lot of risk on the part of all of us still, which thankfully, I think we have enough funding, each of us now, to keep going, but it's still taking a long time. And I think it needs to come from bottom up too, because even if you have a champion, it's the most senior person that says, I want this, and you need to go in the field and use this tomorrow. 9 out of 10 times, a soldier or an airman or Marine will say, I don't want this. Like, you just gave this to me. This wasn't what I was asking for. And so if you don't have a top-down approach of a champion at a senior level, but also the users and the groundswell that are saying we want this, it doesn't really matter. I think we saw this a lot, like especially in our early work at SOCOM, which I think more than anything, why we are still there 12 years later when we started as a bridge solution, just like the smallest tiny IRAD money that we got from an office in the Pentagon, and why we're still there today is because we've spent so much time with those folks and the users in the field, and they have been the groundswell that even when, an acquisition arm has said, like, maybe we want to go with someone else, they've said, no, this is what we need today. This is helping us save lives. And so having that groundswell at the bottom has been, to me, equally as important as opposed to just having, the top-down approach. Because, almost like anything in life where someone tells you have to use something, and if it's not what you like, you just, like I said, it kind of ends up in the corner, and someone says it's still on the system, but no one's using it. So that's been something that I think has been really important for us.
Yeah, interesting. I really enjoyed Secretary LaPlante's comments earlier today, and one thing that I wrote down that he said is, he he was talking about this same thing about kind of working with technology companies and working on innovation centers. And he says, help us think about manufacturing tech products, help us think about how to develop software. Do you feel heard by him and his organization? Are there dialogues of this kind going on between people in the tech community and people in defense?
Wow, that question feels like a trap, doesn't it?
I was like, Matt, you can go first.
Yeah. Nose goes. I'll take the swing at it. Why not? Right? Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The communication has increased a ton. There's a software acquisition path. I mean, there's all sorts of interesting stuff taking place. I would say the one thing that we still feel dissonance on, well, there's a lot of things, but like if I were to point, again, I want to point out new stuff that hasn't probably been talked about all day, there is an order of magnitude difference between the expectation for the government of what software costs and what it actually costs. So like literally like an order of magnitude. So you'll go in and you'll say, sir, what do you think this takes to build? And they'll go, 10 people and $10 million, right? And like the actual answer is probably more like 500 people and $150 million. And so order of magnitude differences, you can't like kind of get there through conversation, right? That's like a hard dissonance to figure out. This often sort of centers on platforms and architecture. So the commercial sector has figured out the platform and architecture game. And they pour, billions and billions and billions a year into sometimes a platform that literally does nothing. It just enables someone else to do something. And they make money off of it, right? And so until we figure out like the dissonance in the order of magnitude math between how the government thinks about cost for these things and what they actually cost, if we were to look at it from a commercial perspective, we're always going to not be able to actually meet in the middle on a plan that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I think this is particularly true with software. With hardware, if you said we're going to go build the next gen fighter, and you came to the table and you said, how much is this going to cost? Someone would say, that seems really expensive, but you know what? I don't know how to build that here, so I bet you're right, and they're willing to take that risk. When you say, and Matt's analogy was a good one, how much is this going to cost? How many people is it going to take? The thought then seems to be, well, I can just probably build this myself, and I can save a lot of money doing it. And if we've seen time after time all the failed programs, in particular software programs, where the mentality is then I'm going to build this in house. It's going to cost less. I'm going to get it done. And you look, and 5-10 years later, the thing is still not working. And you look at how much money has been spent. It's sad, because you could have done it faster. You could have done it with something that's available today, and you could have done it for a lot less money. Because what they think of how much it costs is, while it's still more expensive what it really costs, they actually end up exceeding what it would really cost to pay a commercial company to do that. And I think there's just dozens of examples throughout the government where we've seen this happen.
Software as a service is really hard for a lot of our acquisition community to really kind of embrace. Can you give some anecdotes, experiences about how you've convinced or kind of made the case why software as a service is important for DoD? Even though it's intuitive in the commercial sector, I imagine the DoD, they're still very, very skeptical. I'd love to hear some opinions on that.
Yeah, I know you're going to look at me first. I was going to allow one of you. Yeah, what do I think about this? I think when we compete on projects that have been like legacy systems and what they're looking to upgrade, I think that's a large part of it. Is how do you change the mindset that you're not going to just deliver something one day and then there's going to be this O&M tail, and you're not going to continue to do iteration, and you're not going to continue to provide that service. And I remember sitting, I won't say the customer, one day, and they asked me like, well, when do you stop doing upgrades? So like, when will that be it? And I asked them, like, do you have an iPhone or Android? Like, do you not download the latest update when you get that? And I think they didn't. I think they wanted to say that they didn't, because they didn't want to answer, like, me to prove the point that, like, would you just sit there and watch your iPhone, iOS update come in and not take that upgrade? It's like shocking to me that some people still think that way. But again, I think this goes back a little bit to the cost and understanding what the cost of software is and understanding the cost of hardware, and people still not being able to grapple with the fact that software is so important. And if you look at, if you look at what's going on in the Ukraine right now, it's not just about ammo. It's not just about, munitions. It's about software, and it's about what those folks are doing, and some of the great work that some of the folks on the stage are part of. A lot of it is about software, and so the investment in that is critical for national security. And so the investment, and you want to keep paying for that. You want to continue to see updates here, and if you didn't, it's like it's putting our national security at risk, right? So I think, again, like there's been friction in that in the past, but it is one place that I think we're seeing more and more progress. I don't think we're entirely there yet, but we probably never will be on the scale. But my hope is that as more legacy systems kind of start to age, and as more companies start to produce really valuable software, that there'll be a better likening to this, and people will be more comfortable with it in the future.
I did want to get to one thing. We started on Ukraine a little bit, and other than the software as a service part of this, how has the conflict there changed the conversations that you're having? Has the attitude changed on the person that sitting across the table from you, and has it changed within your own companies? I mean, given that all of the products that you sell are very relevant in that conflict.
Yeah, I mean, we were very vocal about our support. Our CEO, I think, was like one of the first CEOs from a tech company to go to Ukraine, and I think actually what I've seen a lot of, and I appreciate a lot of, is the fact that people in the government have appreciated our outspoken support, because sometimes it's actually incredible to see that not everyone does want to show their support. And so personally, I'm proud of that fact. I think it's opened up a lot of doors, not just actually with the government, but with other companies too. Like there's a lot of work that we've done in the last year with different partnerships with different companies together, other like-minded companies, to figure out what we can do to partner to field some of the best technology there. So I think the conversation hasn't just changed on the public and private side, but actually on the private to private side, of seeing more integration and kind of reliance on just some of those private partnerships to bring forth the best technology. But I think there's a deep appreciation for any company by the U.S. government and by our allies, quite frankly, in companies that are willing to stand up and say that they are offering their support. So that's, I think, one of the most heartfelt things that I've seen personally over the last year.
Yeah.